Welcome to this Palmer's webinar, which, as the title suggests, is all about menopause at work. The webinar is scheduled to run for approximately 45 minutes. We will hopefully have time for questions at the end, which we'll happily take as we go through. If you could use your Q&A option on your Zoom toolbar to put forward any questions that you have for us. As I say, we'll hopefully find some time at the end to answer those for you. I'm delighted to be joined today by Samantha, Randall and Ola McGhee. Samantha's Associate Solicitor here at Palmer's and Ola is Solicitor. They're your presenters for today, and we are recording this webinar, so we will make an on-demand version available on the website tomorrow, enabling you to recap on any points that you may wish to after hearing the presentation today. Okay, so we've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to hand over at this point and enjoy the webinar.
Welcome everybody, thanks for joining us on this very hot day. So today we're going to be covering menopause in the workplace. I'm just showing you now a background of what we're going to cover. Menopause is a universal process. It affects working age women at some point in their lives. And despite this, the symptoms that it presents, sometimes lasting up to 10 years, and impacts on work are poorly recognised by employers. This has potential implications for the ability of females to work happily and productively, as the cause and effect of their symptoms are mainly, in the main, rarely disclosed to management for fear of ridicule and lack of understanding. But it is generally understood by clinicians that the menopause, although not an illness, can impact the physical and psychological health of women in and outside of work. In general, the studies show that employers have been slow to recognise that women of menopausal age may need specific considerations, and many employers do not yet have clear processes in place to support women coping with menopausal symptoms. The TUC survey of March 2003 found that 45% of respondents said their managers didn't recognise problems associated with menopause. Almost 1 in 3 respondents reported management criticism of menopause-related sick leave, and 1 in 5 spoke of criticism, ridicule, and even harassment from their managers when the subject was broached. Employers have responsibility for the health and safety of all employees, and there is a strong business case for companies to proactively support women with menopausal symptoms at work, often at the peak of their skills, experience, and careers. Additionally, there is a legal case for supporting women with menopausal symptoms and managing an age-diverse workforce. The legal implications of not providing employees with necessary support and reasonable adjustments can be costly, as we'll find out later on in this seminar. So for now, I will just go over what we're going to cover, and that is women in the workplace. I'll give you a brief background on menopause. We'll cover menopausal challenges in the workplace, the employer's current legal obligations, relevant case law, which is fairly recent, how employers' legal obligations around the menopause are potentially changing, and then providing you with some guidance on raising menopause awareness and nurturing a positive culture in the workplace. So we hope against this backdrop that we can assist you in opening opportunities to create a more supportive culture to enable employees impacted directly or indirectly by the menopause to work effectively. This should not only reduce the risk of tribunal claims, but more importantly, foster a more understanding and productive workforce and workplace. In turn, we hope that that would be able to help your organisation retain talented individuals, which is really key at the moment, many of whom will be senior or in well-established roles. And I'll hand over now to Sam to provide you with a background of women in the workplace.
So our first topic is going to look at where women are working a lot later in life, and in bigger numbers more than ever before. Over 70% are in paid employment, making up about 40% of the UK's workforce. Menopausal women tend to be between the ages of 45 to 60 years old, are the fastest moving demographic in the UK workplace, with their employment participation rising by about 3.2% between 1994 and 2014. This age group also accounted for 72% of the growth in women's employment in the same period. The reasons for the increase are beyond the remit of this presentation, but in brief, many comprise of the abolition of the default retirement age, the increased life expectancy, and the increase in the state pension age. So, what is menopause? So, menopause is a natural period in a woman's life. However, unlike pregnancy, menopause is rarely openly discussed. It is true that all women with menopausal symptoms experience menopause transition symptoms differently, and the CIPD research conducted in March 2019 found that 3 in 5 women experiencing menopausal symptoms said that it had an adverse effect on their ability to work. Again, this research estimated that around 10% of women actually stopped working altogether because of their severe menopausal symptoms. These findings were nearly 2/3 said that they were less able to concentrate, more than half said they were experiencing more stress as a result, and more than half said that they felt less patient with clients and colleagues. So almost 1/3 of the women that were surveyed said that they had taken sick leave because of their symptoms, and only a quarter of those women felt that they were able to tell their manager the real reason for their absence. Privacy was the #1 issue for the non-disclosure, and 1/3 said that they were embarrassed. Another 32% of those set out that their manager was unsupportive of the reason. So studies have shown that and found that their symptoms are not always associated with the hormonal change, and instead refer to a domino effect. This is where one symptom leads to another. So for example, night sweats causing insomnia, which causes headaches and irritability. Nonetheless, in spite of the symptoms experienced, the evidence indicates that the symptoms have a detrimental effect on working life and performance at work, which then results in other issues in the workplace. So moving on to look at the actual effect on work. The national average of days lost because of sickness is around 4.3, which costs an employer around £554 per an employee annually. In 2016, the groups experiencing the highest rate of sickness absence were women, older workers, and those with long-term health conditions. It's unclear how much of this absence is related to menopause. This wasn't surveyed. However, a 2018 study reported that a sample of menopausal women had a higher than average work absence, which is about 2.37 full days in 4 weeks prior to the survey being conducted. So it would seem logical that absence can be reduced with changes to support menopausal women. And as we said, menopausal symptoms can interfere with a woman's working life. Hot flushes can occur in the middle of an important meeting, which leads to anxiety regarding exerting themselves. Increased tiredness because of lack of sleep and disturbances may also mean that a menopausal woman are coming into work late or taking increased sickness absence for that reason. So it's not surprising that women often experience embarrassment or reduced self-confidence in the workplace for these reasons. Some women may also start to feel less valuable to their employers as a result of menopausal issues that interfere with their work, which may in certain circumstances reduce their capability or productivity. Some women may eventually choose to reduce their working hours or even leave employment altogether, especially where their employer is doing little to support them. So I'll now hand in back to Ola, where we're both going to do a bit of a quiz to test your knowledge on the menopause. So what we'll do is we'll take the questions one by one, and if you can type in the comment section what you think the answer is, and then we'll go through those afterwards. So Ola, if you want to read out the first question that we've got.
Yeah. So what is menopause?
So we'll give you a few minutes to put a little idea in the chat box, and then we'll cover off your answers.
Okay, and what age does menopause usually begin? And then number 3, how old does a woman, when is a woman considered to be in menopause, and how after she's missed how many menstrual cycles? Number 4, what are the 3 stages of menopause? Number 5, how long do menopausal hot flushes last? I think I'm having one myself at the moment. Number 6, from a survey of menopausal women conducted in March 2019, what percentage of women said that menopause affected their work? Number 7, what percentage of women leave the workforce because of menopausal symptoms? Number 8, name 4 symptoms of menopause. 1 point for each correct answer. Nine, what percentage of women with menopausal symptoms do not tell their employers about why they are struggling? And finally, number 10, what percentage of women say they have no support at work? So, moving on from that.
So let's have a look at the answers. So it's just a bit of fun just to get you all thinking and see if we get any surprises along the way. So the first question was, what is menopause? So menopause is defined by the very last menstrual period, when the production of estrogen and progesterone hormones, which take place in the ovaries, shut down for good. So I think everyone's on the right lines there. At what age does menopause usually begin? So obviously we've got somewhere between the ages of 45 and 60. Obviously that's just an approximate, obviously it differs person to person. Question number 3, a woman is considered to be in menopause after she has missed how many menstrual cycles? And the answer is when they've had their last menstrual cycle, so effectively 1, but it isn't actually diagnosed until it's been period free for a year, interestingly. And what are the 3 stages of menopause? We've got, I won't try and pronounce those, but they are
menopause and postmenopause.
There we are. Question number 5, how long do menopausal hot flushes last? So I know that these answers varied from 10 minutes to forever. On average, 7 years, but it can last up to 10 years. New studies showing that most women experience hot flushes for an average duration of 7 years, can be considerably longer. So again, varies person to person. And number 7, a survey of menopausal women conducted in March 2019. What percentage of women said that menopause affected their work? I think everyone had pretty high percentages here. 3 out of 5, so about 59%. Question number 7, what percentage of women leave the workforce because of menopausal symptoms? So about 10%. So that's attributing to quite a large number of women. And name 4 symptoms. So I assume the list is a lot longer than 4, but if you've got any one of these, then you've got a point. And question number 9, what percentage of women with menopausal symptoms don't tell their employer about why they're struggling? So it's a massive 70%. Just don't feel that they're able to have those kinds of conversations, particularly if it's with someone younger than them or with a man. And 48% of these women felt that their mental health has suffered because of that, and particularly in performance. And lastly, question number 10 was, what percentage of women say they have no support at work? And the answer is, again, 75%, with 50% of them saying that they want their employer to provide more information about coping with menopausal symptoms at work. So as we can see, it's a massive issue that isn't really spoke about and hasn't really been dealt with in the workplace until, well, recently, really.
Yeah. Okay, so we're moving on now to the employment law. And I'll say that although menopause isn't specifically protected under the Equality Act, we are starting to see many more claims being lodged at the tribunal in relation to disability discrimination. I've had a few myself over the last few months. Others on the radar could be age, gender, or disability discrimination related. So although it's not specifically mentioned by the Equality Act, there are ways that employees will be able to benefit from that piece of legislation. So it can be covered under the Equality Act because menopause is in relation to 3 protected characteristics, that is age, sex, and potentially disability as in relation to the symptoms. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 provides for safe working, which extends to working conditions when experiencing menopausal symptoms. And ACAS have recently introduced new codes of practice in relation to flexible working. So all of those are important, but also the fact that employers need to adhere to their own internal policies and procedures to make sure that it's being followed. Sometimes the guidance is there, but sometimes it's not followed. So it's really important to do that. And we can take you through some of the types of legal claims that employees with menopausal symptoms may be able to pursue in the UK with reference to recent case law. So in relation to discrimination, as I said, under the Equality Act, menopause discrimination is largely covered under the 3 protected characteristics of age, sex, and disability. There have been several calls, in fact, for further legislation to require employers to put in place a workplace menopause policy to protect women going through the menopause against discrimination and or detriment whilst at work. If a worker is treated unfairly because of their menopausal symptoms, this could amount to discrimination because, for example, of their sex or a disability and or of their age. So it's prudent for management to be alert to any problems that may arise for menopausal women at work and to take steps to make adjustments that are reasonable in the workplace, just as they would for any other employee struggling with their health. Given that menopause mostly affects women of a certain age, it's important to ensure that there are no provisions, criteria, or practices which may adversely affect women of menopausal age to avoid any claims of sex or age discrimination. It's important to obviously act as a responsible employer, and operating under the best practice guidelines really is the best way to support employees and protect your company from a tribunal claim. Menopause in the workplace isn't a new issue, but I feel it's a subject that has for far too long now been left in the shadows. This is now clearly starting to change slowly, but we're getting there. The employment tribunals and ACAS suggest that more and more claims are being brought in which adverse treatment as a result of menopause is being alleged. In 2019, there were 6 cases. There were 16 in 2020. And such cases are rarely appealed. And we're aware of 2 cases that have been appealed to date. So I'm just going to take you through some of the cases that have been decided. Just a brief stop tour around some case law. So the first one is Merchant and BT of 2012. Miss Merchant was the woman with menopausal symptoms. She was being performance managed in relation to capability, so her performance wasn't up to scratch. Her manager sought a report from her doctor, and the doctor told them that there were health issues related to menopause, but the employer just disregarded this medical evidence and dismissed her for poor performance without taking into account her menopausal symptoms. And he unfortunately also made the mistake of using his own experience with his wife having gone through the menopause and attached that to Mrs. Merchant. So he relied on anecdotal evidence, namely his wife, rather than the medical evidence from the GP. And the tribunal, unsurprisingly, found against BT because he'd failed to follow the capability procedure, which referred to seeking medical advice. And it also concluded that BT wouldn't have treated a male going through the same situation in the same way. So Miss Merchant was successful in her claim for unfair dismissal and discrimination in relation to her sex. The next one is Davis and Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service. Unfortunately, this was a case where the employee was a court officer and she was perimenopausal. This case is from 2018. She was perimenopausal and had significant symptoms. She had cystitis alongside the symptoms, which would that is a menopausal symptom as well. And she was prescribed granular medication to put into water that she had to take on a regular basis. On one occasion, when she briefly left the court, 2 male court users were seen drinking her water. And when she returned, her jug was empty. She assumed that they had been drinking her water, and she told them that if they had drunk it, then they would have had her medication. At which point, one of them started ranting out, shouting at her. The court investigated under health and safety and followed this by a disciplinary investigation into Miss Davis, and concluded that she hadn't shown any remorse or shown values of the organisation. She later amended her story to say that because her water was pink, she was mistaken, as the men had been drinking clear water. Nonetheless, she was dismissed for gross misconduct, despite an occupational therapy health report which confirmed that she was in perimenopause, which affected her memory and concentration. They didn't take into account the evidence of the impact of menopause in relation to her concentration and behaviour, and the tribunal ordered in her favour. She was reinstated and awarded £19,000. £14,000 of that was back pay, and £5,000 was in relation to the discrimination element of the claim for injury to feelings. So it's not an insignificant amount, and so it's quite important to get these things right. Moving on to the next slide, we've got A and Bon Marché Limited, which is a 2019 claim. So in this claim, the claimant was a senior supervisor with the retailer and had worked there for a pretty long time. Her manager started bullying her and harassing her, ridiculing her as she was going through the menopause and was aware that she was going through the menopause. He called her a dinosaur and encouraged the other employees to laugh at his comments. There was a restructure, her post was unaffected, yet others were encouraged to apply for her role. As a result of this, she started experiencing anxiety and stress. had some significant sickness absence, but did manage to return to her work on a phased basis, with it working shorter hours. But in spite of this, her manager placed her on a full shift the following week. She decided that she couldn't do this anymore. The situation was untenable, and she resigned in response to the bullying, and decided to pursue a claim for age and sex discrimination. As a result, she was successful. She was awarded £28,000, and £10,000 of that was loss of earnings. The bulk of the award was discrimination, injury to feelings, because of the level of bullying and harassment that was that she'd suffered. So again, something that you really would need to take into account is the discrimination element, because there's no upper limit to discrimination compensation. So in relation to constructive dismissal and menopause, obviously under the Employment Rights Act, an employee with 2 years service can claim unfair dismissal, and this imposes a duty on employers to act fairly when dismissing employees, and obviously you need to have a good reason to support a dismissal. But you'd also need to be aware of constructive dismissal, and claims for constructive dismissal can arise where an employee can't cope with how they're being treated and resign as a result, as in the previous case I mentioned did. So when they resign as a result of the treatment they've received, in these situations they can claim that the behaviour and conduct of their employer has led to them to making that decision. Even though they've resigned, they can assert that it's a dismissal by their employer. So that's just something that you'd also need to be aware of. I'll hand you now back to Sam, who will discuss costs of not supporting menopause in the workplace.
So as we've seen from some of the case law, that it can be quite costly for an employer to not support women facing menopause in the workplace. So not complying with essential legislation and best practice can leave an employer wide open to grievances, litigation and expense. Not only were these tribunals costly, they have also been costly in terms of legal fees. But there's also reputational damage to think about as well, and the cost of that to a company. This type of case can damage an employer's standing in terms of being a good and reasonable employer, supporting the health and well-being of all employees, not just women. Tribunal litigation is a costly process for an employer for many reasons, and an employee now no longer needs to pay an issue fee to bring a claim. Therefore, organisations must take steps to protect themselves and to effectively and responsibly support their workforce. A big benefit to employees is that compensation is under loss of pension, and they can also issue proceedings against individuals in the workplace who may have been personally liable, and for any compensation that's awarded as well. So how can employers foster a supportive culture and reduce the risk of litigation? So as with any long-standing health condition, it's important that employers are compassionate, and providing appropriate support from managers and colleagues is imperative, so that employees are given the assistance that they require. It's important that they implement and revisit appropriate policies and gender-sensitive risk assessments, that they initiate practical policies such as adequate heating and cooling in office spaces so that body temperatures can be managed more effectively, and making desk fans more easily available, which I think everyone will agree with in the last couple of weeks. Providing line managers and supervisors with training surrounding awareness of day-to-day menopausal-related episodes and the ways to collaboratively support women. And supporting rather than managing, so the menopause through the work, and providing information on menopause for all employees where they can access rigorous evidence-based research and advice. So knowledge is important. In the absence of any kind of menopause policy or integrated menopause in other organisational policies such as flexible working and procedures, and occupational health and safety reports. So it's important that this is really ingrained into all of your policies. And promoting the business case approach to older women in the workplace surrounding ambition, resilience, knowledge and collegial labour as a significant factor in the organisation's success. So it's really given them the recognition as well, so that they do feel valued. So all of these above recommendations would benefit any business by reducing negative workplace outcomes, such as reduced engagement in work, reduced job satisfaction, reduced commitment to the organisation, higher sickness absence, and increased desire to stop working altogether, punctuality and time management, emotional resilience, and just the ability to complete tasks effectively. So you can see it has a wide impact across the workplace. One size unfortunately doesn't necessarily fit all, but nonetheless it's important to approach menopause holistically and integrate the relevant policies across all areas to be effective. Increasing awareness means that it's more important than ever for businesses to have a good understanding of menopause and how support can be provided to their colleagues through the transition via certain policies and processes, thus ensuring that employees are engaged and performance through delivering solutions to the challenges that women of a menopausal age face and remaining in the workplace. So what does the future look like? So in July 2021, so only last year, the House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee launched an inquiry into workplace issues surrounding the menopause. And the inquiry included the following actions. So examining existing discrimination legislation and workplace practices to consider whether enough is being done to prevent women from leaving their jobs as a result of menopausal symptoms or other adverse consequences that arise. Drawing up recommendations with a view to shaping policies to address gender equality. And these include the nature and extent of discrimination faced by women experiencing the menopause and the wider impact on society, the economic impacts of menopause discrimination and how businesses factor in the needs of employees effective, and how the practices addressing workplace discrimination relating to menopause can be implemented. And lastly, a consideration of whether further legislation is required to enable employers to put in place a workplace menopause policy to protect people going through menopause whilst at work. So the inquiry closed on the 17th of September last year. And during a second reading debate of the menopause bill on the 27th of October 2021, the government provided an outline of the action it intends to take to address menopause issues at work. Of particular interest were some of the following points. So it's important that employers create a supportive environment. Several organisations, including CIPD, the British Menopause Society and the Faculty of Occupational Medicine, have produced guidelines for employers to use to support them. Flexible working options, whether that's part-time or job sharing, can also assist those experiencing menopausal symptoms. And recommendations will be made to Parliament, or have been back in November last year, following a roundtable with organisations including the British Chamber of Commerce and the Federation of Small Businesses to improve support and understanding of the menopause. In England, the menopause will be a women's health strategy priority. The government recognises that the work needs to be done in this area, including in relation to workforce support. And so we'll establish a menopause task force to encourage fast and coherent approach to the improved support of those experiencing menopause. So there is a possibility of changing equality laws to provide better protection for menopausal women, and therefore it's not been ruled out at present. Many celebrities are obviously trying to help raise awareness of this. For example, Davina McCall has recently written a book called Menopausing, and has starred in a Channel 4 documentary just sort of documenting her own experiences. So for organisations that care about employee women wellbeing and fostering an inclusive culture, providing support for these women obviously makes sense on a commercial reasoning. To improve employer brand, have higher retention rates, and improve the organisation's performance and boosting employees' morale. So a lot of change potentially on the cards in the future. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So I hope you found it insightful. I have got a couple of minutes for questions. So I think we've got one already. And of course, we will circulate the slides as well. So a couple of minutes, if anyone has any questions, or if anyone's got any questions personally they want to raise, then do feel free to approach myself or Ola, and we'll be happy to have a discussion in a more private setting. But other than that, just on behalf of myself and Ola, thank you for joining us, and we hope you've enjoyed it this afternoon.
Thank you.